It's 6:30, so we will start the budget workshop meeting. If we could all stand for the flag salute, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This is the Wall Township Board of Education meeting for which adequate notice under the Open Public Meeting Act was provided by a notice in the Co-Star, Asbury Park Press, all Wall Township schools. Copy of the notice in the Board Administration Office and the Township Administrator's Office on March 7, 2019, and this is a special meeting as a budget workshop meeting. Take a roll call. Mr. Adenizio.
Present.
Mr. McGee. Here. Mr. MacArthur.
Here.
Ms. Malloy.
She will not be here tonight.
Mr. Sanfilippo.
Here.
Mr. Sullivan.
Here.
Mr. Wondrak.
He will not be here tonight.
Ms. Waniak.
Here.
Ms. Connolly.
Here. To begin the budget workshop, Mr. Smythe has a handout he's going to go over with us.
Yes, at your chair this evening, there should be a memo from me to the board. This is a follow-up from our F&F committee, and after receiving our notice of state aid, and one other adjustment that we received with regard to the budget. Does everybody have it?
This one?
Okay. Yes. And rather than making changes to the budget and handing out new budget detail sheets, next week we are scheduled to approve a tentative budget because the following day I need to submit to the Department of Education. So at that time, any changes that have been made in the last or since our last budget workshop, or any changes that are going to be proposed tonight, I'll incorporate them into the budget and give everyone a tentative budget, a final tentative budget for next week for approval. So that's why there's no budget detail sheets or any handouts for tonight. The first item is the revision since the last budget workshop. The one is we did receive our state aid notice. We have an increase of $156,806. And the reason why it's written there, I'm writing it as like a contra appropriation, because even though it's a increase in state aid, it's actually like a negative to the appropriation side, so that all the numbers add up, if that makes sense to. I hope it does. Made sense to me. Like on the second item, reduce the core switch, which was budgeted in account 1230-300-730. That equipment was originally budgeted at $200,000. Mr. Lee, and after I go through the memo, can expand on it, has obtained quotes and is through E-rate and is able to reduce that budget line item to $90,000. So we reduced it $110,000. So those two together will be an available increase in appropriations. How those funds are recommended to be appropriated or included in the budget is the purchase of 4 additional buses. If we obtain approval of our EPA grant, they have still not issued notice, but they've indicated unofficially that we will be awarded the grant. That is up to $20,000 to replace a bus. We originally only included the replacement of one large bus in the 1920 budget. However, the application for the clean diesel program through the EPA was to replace 5 buses. So if we're approved, which it does appear that we will be, we'll receive up to $100,000 to replace 5 buses, or $20,000 per bus. This would address our bus needs for not only this year, but replacing buses in the following year's budget and possibly the next one, because we are evaluating our need for busing on an annual basis. But to take advantage of the $20,000 per bus, it is recommended that we reallocate those funds from the equipment line to the lease purchase for buses. Additionally, the difference of $30,000 would go toward the increase in capital projects. If you recall, in capital projects, we budgeted $600,000 without necessarily identifying specific projects, because we knew we were going to be exceeding that dollar amount, but that was the amount that was going to be funding our capital projects or capital facility projects from the annual budget or from our current expense, with the remaining funds coming from a drawdown on our capital reserve account. This would increase the local share of funding capital projects from $600,000 to $630,000. With regard to the state aid, or the increase in state aid, there's two options available. The recommended option is to increase proposed salary increases in the 099. As you know, we are in negotiations with the WTEA. We do not have salary guides for next year. We've estimated those on a percentage basis what the increase will be for salaries, and I would recommend that we increase those accounts by the additional state aid that we receive. That would have a net change in the budget to zero, so that we are at the same number that we were at the last budget workshop. The other alternative for the increase in state aid is to reduce the tax levy, as opposed to increasing the proposed salaries in the 099 accounts. Again, the net change in the budget would be zero if you were to reduce the tax levy by the amount of $156,806. Any questions on that section of the memo? Okay. The next block is the F&F recommended project for the facilities accounts, and there's two accounts. One is for the design and contingency fees, and the $450 is for actual construction. As has been discussed, when we approved phase one of the HVAC project, is to budget the phase, when we approved the phase one, is to budget the phase two in the 2019-17 budget. In accordance with the long-range facility plan and as proposed by our engineer, the cost estimate for that is $2.7 million. As discussed at the last budget workshop, we included $250,000 for improvements or necessary facilities for our student transportation with our shared service agreement. As an outgrowth of our discussion in finance and facilities, it's been identified that our operations building, where we maintain our buses and where our operations department is housed, is in serious need of a new roof. It's been repaired numerous times, continues to leak, and that cost estimate that we received for that project is $160,000. So we've identified that project to be included in the capital facilities. And as well as the design and contingency fees for the above noted projects, mainly being the HVAC project. Design and contingency fees of $300,000 for a total of $3,457,000. Okay, how to fund that facilities accounts, capital reserve account analysis. We anticipate at the end of this year having $4.6 million, and that's based on not utilizing all the funds that we've included in the current year budget. We've appropriated, or we plan to appropriate, because we've not approved any contracts, about $1.4 million for the facilities, for the HVAC, the phase one. We have another, I would have to look at the plan, $400,000 anticipated in paving projects. Is that good with the number? Sorry, paving, $233,000, sorry. And then another $170,000 in other projects out of the current year. We anticipate, if we do move forward with all those projects in the current year, we'll have about $856,000 remaining in our capital account that we will be required to move back into our capital reserve. That'll increase our capital reserve to about $4.6 million, and then we would draw down from that capital reserve $2,827,000 to fund the 2019-20 capital facilities budget, leaving a anticipated balance of $1,812,000. That's strictly based on moving funds from our current capital facilities account line back into our capital reserve and then drawing it back out. That would not consider any other funds being deposited into our capital reserve account at year end. If you recall, we do that at year end. We put funds into the emergency reserve. We also have the ability to put it in our maintenance reserve as well as our capital reserve. That's not being factored in here.
Can I interrupt with a question?
Sure.
Is the difference between the numbers that you just reviewed and the column on the long-range facility plan that says 2019-20, is that, the numbers are slightly different. Is that the $30,000? Okay, thank you.
To clarify, the long-range facility plan did not anticipate an additional $30,000 being budgeted in the budget for capital improvements. So I was anticipating a larger drawdown to fund the budget. So if we increase the amount of funds coming from the local revenue for the capital projects, it'll reduce the amount that we're going to have to draw down on our capital reserve by $30,000. So that's the difference between the long-range facility plan numbers and the memo.
And to confirm, the West Belmar paving project, is that now part of the 18-19
Yeah.
budget? Okay.
Yes.
So that is gonna be
It's
paid-
been included in the current year.
Okay, so that's why it's not in 19-20, because we've included it in 18-19.
Yes.
Okay.
Lastly, we have the tax levy impact scenarios. I provided 4 scenarios. The second one being at 2%, and that's where we were at the last budget workshop meeting. The budget has been prepared and it's balanced currently at 2%. The increase would be 1.7 cents, with the increase for the average household in Wall Township to be $83.21 on an annual basis. The 3 other scenarios, the one above is if we applied the increase of $156,806 in state aid, if we applied that as tax, strictly as reducing the general fund tax levy, that would be in the first row. The increase to the tax rate would be 1.6 cents as opposed to 1.7 cents. The new proposed tax rate would be 1.139 as opposed to 1.1403. And the annual increase to the average assessed household of $479,900 would be $76.93, or $6.28 a year less than at 2%. And then I provided the 2 scenarios. The $686,381 is our bank cap, and the $300,000 was just an estimate used to be half of the bank cap. Again, just so you're aware, we will not be losing, or any of our bank cap will not be expiring at the end of this budget process. So as far as a discussion, we could discuss any additional projects or any different projects that we would want to include in our capital facilities budget, or how to appropriate the reduction that we had in our capital equipment account of $110,000. Again, I put $80,000 toward buses for the EPA grant and $30,000 to additionally fund the capital projects. And then what to do with the additional state aid of $156,000, whether we put it toward salary increases for the upcoming negotiations, or we identify it to reduce the general fund tax levy, or any other proposed purposes the board would like to discuss.
Madam President?
Mr. Agnizio?
So, it's a little loud. How many buses do we have that are coming up, at the end of their life this year, or because I thought every year we had a couple that were coming up?
Yes, we do. We retired 5 at the end of last year. We are scheduled to retire 2 at the end of the current school year, although we were going to look to only replace 1 next year. And how we factor, or what we take into consideration, is trying to have a balanced line account, so that there may be some fluctuation in the actual number of buses and vans we have, but we're trying to keep it somewhat stable, or within a limited increase for that line. However, at the end of 18-19, we're going to be retiring 2 large buses, and then in 19-20 and after 2021, we'll be retiring 3 buses in each year. So the idea of it is if we wanted to purchase the 5 this year, it would eliminate the need to replace the 3 that we're retiring next year.
But then we'd still run into a problem 15, 20 years down the road where you'd have that bubble of 5 that you'd have to replace at one time.
Yes.
How many did we replace last year?
Last year, we retired 5, and we only purchased 3.
To piggyback off of Mr. Adoniesio's question, what kind of savings are we realizing with this grant by doing it this way?
$20,000 per bus. So, and to, address the fact that we were losing 5 after the 17-18 school year, in the years prior to that, we made adjustments. We purchased 4 in the 15-16 year. 16-17, we didn't purchase any. In 17-18, we purchased 1. The idea of it is we're reducing the number of buses we've had on hand because we've had a declining enrollment. But again, really trying to keep a flat budget on a year-to-year basis.
So what is our current bus fleet at now, and how many, so yeah, what are our total buses right now, and then how many buses are out on the road, say for the intermediate school, since that's the largest, where all of them would be needed, I guess?
For the current school year, we have 30, we're operating with 40 buses currently, and I believe we have about 9 to 10 spares.
So that would be 49 or 50 total? Or is that?
No, counting, we have 40 large
okay.
buses and 9 of them are spares, so we have about 31 to 32 buses that are operating on a daily basis. That doesn't mean we're sending 31 to the intermediate school because
Right.
we're doing parochials and
Right.
other runs. But where the spares really benefit us is our ability to do trips and athletics that other districts can't do because the vendors are not able to do them, or they're charging excessive costs to perform for other school districts, where we do them for the most part in-house, or at least half the run in-house.
Okay.
And we'd also be looking at, a number of years ago, the allowable life of a school bus, a conventional style bus, is 12 years. They bumped that up to 15 years. So these buses have been on the road for 14 years or 13 years for the ones that we're going to be retiring the following year.
And the flat nose are 20 years, right?
Yes, the flat nose are 20 years.
And that's what all the new ones are?
No.
Oh, we're going back the other way?
We went back to conventional. We only bought flat nose for a couple years, but then they changed the style of the conventional bus so that the nose is more of a drop nose, so that there's no longer the visibility problem. One of the benefits of the flat nose was the visibility. And again, a lot of districts like the longer allowable use of the bus over 20 years as opposed to 12. But bus that's been on the road for 18 years, and especially the flat noses that are rear engine, because they drop all the dirt along the road, they are continual maintenance issues for our mechanics. So they can't wait to actually take them off the road.
Okay. And my opinion, well, I two things. One, I was concerned last year, I'm concerned even more so this year, with the financial health of the state of New Jersey. I mean, how we got more money is just mind-boggling to me when the state doesn't have a lot of money, and then they're really chopping some other school districts probably way too fast. I mean, they were probably overfunded, but the amount of money they're taking from them is just crazy, and rightly so, giving it to districts like us that we've been underfunded for a number of years. But my concern is going forward, especially looking at the financial health of the state, and you hear stories about more people leaving New Jersey than coming into New Jersey, and wealthy people leaving, and the tax burden it's putting on everybody. My concern is going forward, could we be looking at chops in the budget in state funding? Because I mean, what they give, they easily can take away, because I know our district has had money cut in state funding in the past. So I just want to make sure that we're not in a situation where we're relying too much on what they're giving us, where they all of a sudden decide next year or the year after that they're going to stop giving us this amount of money or cut it, and then we're looking at serious cuts and problems like Lakewood and, you know, Bricktown, and I think even Tom's River. I mean, all those 3 districts have some major problems going on right now, so. Well, yeah, I mean, I guess if you cry loud enough, but, I mean, for us, it wouldn't matter if everybody in the town cried at the same time. We wouldn't get that kind of money ever. So that's I think, a real concern we have to keep in mind, because it's scary. I mean, that could really change the playing field for us here in town on a number of different levels.
Well, one thing to consider in reviewing the replacement of buses, in next year, to keep that line account flat, we'd be spending, you know, another 40,000 replacing 2 buses, or I think we're projecting that we would purchase 2 buses next year. If we were to include that in the current year, we would no longer need to, add 2 more additional buses in the following year's budget. So even though it's an $80,000 increase in that line account for the current year, it would only be a $40,000 increase in the subsequent year's budget, because it would be reduced by what we've already anticipated as budgeting, because we have buses that are coming off our lease purchase after the 1920 school year.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
No, yeah, I got it.
Conversely, if we're getting money from the state now, and in fact may not receive money from the state later, and we have significant needs in each of our physical plants, wouldn't the wise thing to be to use it when we have it, in order to make the repairs we do? In other words, if the money's used for these projects, it's not for a recurring line item in each year's budget. It would be to actually fix the things that are broken. So I think there is some benefit, though I do understand that looking forward, it is important to look at the horizon and see whether or not there's a cliff coming soon. I certainly agree with that. That's a wise sentiment. However, we have the money now. And some of these projects really should be discussed, and we really should debate them and determine where, if we want to use that money, it is best placed in terms of when we don't have the money, perhaps in 2 or 3 years. Those things can't get fixed.
And I agree with you. So my concern would be that if you're taking this money and then you're adding it into a salary account, that becomes part of the base budget, correct? Mr. Smythe, for the following year, the 2% would be based on that, correct?
Yes.
So if we took that money and we utilized it for, let's say, a project, like a one-time project, can you do that and then it not become part of the base budget?
Well, the appropriation, if it was used for a project, would not be part of the base budget in the following year. It would just be an additional project. But
Okay.
you're referring on the revenue side?
Well, right. So what Mr. McGee said, so if, let's say we took that and we purchased, let's just say a boiler, okay? Capital improvement, one-time thing, and we use it. And let's say that $157,000 was cut from the budget next year in financial aid to us. That wouldn't necessarily affect our standing how things are. Where if we put that $157,000 into a salary account, let's say, and then we're now depending on it and that money's cut, we're short $157,000, and we might not have taken care of a project.
Yes,
Okay.
that would be accurate. So, buses, which is a 5-year commitment as opposed to, eternal commitment, and we anticipate increases in that line account in subsequent years, so it would be offset by those anticipated budget increases. So even though it would be, at least on this line, looking at $80,000 for the buses, and again, this isn't applied to the state aid, this is more of the other budget cut that we had in the equipment. But the increase in state aid, in trying to look to what the recommendation would be on the appropriation side, would be one of the two, either including it for salaries because it is an unknown at this point, or to apply it for tax relief, or reducing the general fund tax levy. Well, or it could be any other, it could be an additional project if you want to put those funds toward capital projects and add an additional project to it, or to reduce the amount that you need to draw down from the capital reserve account in order to fund the projects that are currently in there.
Okay.
Leaving more of a balance in your capital reserve account.
I think my sentiment on it is that I don't want to see it 2% then plus this for something else, where then it becomes part of what the 2% is based on next year, especially if something is cut. Because I honestly, I have zero faith in the state of New Jersey and their funding and how they're going about doing things right now. So that, I think that's a real concern, and you know, you listen to the news, you read the articles, I mean, there's concerns on multiple levels with the way our state's going, and you know, you look around us, New York City, you know, is very close to bankruptcy, which is a totally different animal, but governments around here are really taking a beating right now.
So it's fair to say that you'd be on board if we were going to replace a furnace as opposed to create a bigger mortgage?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, look, we discussed in F&F. I mean, we have boilers that are 60, 70 years old, at least, and you know, all the issues with them. I mean, they're not the diamonds that everybody gets to see, and it looks really nice, like a new floor and new chairs. But I mean, there's certainly things that, if they go wrong, they're a major expense, and we have some serious problems with them. So, yeah, I'm on board with that.
I'm having a little trouble. So, to me, it seems like the only way that the funds are not permanently part of a budget is if we provide tax relief with the $156,000. If we use $156,000 to do a project, it's still going to be in the budget. It's just that the project is not a recurring project. So I'm not sure that I'm following the logic.
Well, I think when you take a revenue source, and is it going to be a recurring revenue source, and you would anticipate that the additional $156,000 in state aid will be a recurring revenue in future years. Mr. Adenizio is not comfortable with that. Like, an increase to the tax levy should be perpetual, where we're gonna see that revenue in the subsequent year. If you use that revenue in 1920 for a capital project, and you complete the project, you complete the year, and the following year, you don't receive that additional $156,000 in state aid, that's okay, because you completed your project. You just may not be able to do another project. However, if you use it for something that's going to be a recurring cost, and a good example is salaries, well, those salaries are going to be there in each subsequent year, plus whatever increase will be going on top of that. I think that's
right.
the
Okay,
concern.
I fully understand that. However, if you're using it for a capital project or some improvement, the only way that it's not a perpetual increase to the base is if the state cuts that funding
Yes.
in a subsequent year.
Yes.
Okay.
I think the concern is more the obligation on the appropriation side.
Okay.
So really, I mean, in terms of giving the money towards salaries, you're just sort of taking some of that money and using it for 1 year, basically, and then it's just part of the budget next year. If the money doesn't come from the state, then we're still on the hook for all of that money. But in the end, I mean, the salaries are sort of going to be the salaries to some degree anyway, right?
Well, at this point in time, we don't know what the salaries are going to be. So we've estimated, but you know, there's a process of negotiations, and if we've not budgeted sufficient funds for that final collective bargaining agreement, then we're going to have to find the funds somewhere else within this budget. So what it does is it gives more room or more of an opportunity to fund whatever the settled contract is. And we say salaries, but there's other costs that are going to be incurred by the district within that collective bargaining agreement. And these funds are being identified as salaries, but they would be utilized to fund whatever provisions are settled in the collective bargaining agreement.
I'm just saying, in general, like I think what Ralph was saying is if it's not something that then gets compounded into the budget and increases every year and creates a higher baseline, it might be better to use them for capital projects as opposed to just throwing it into salaries or wherever it's going to be, when in the end that all works itself out.
Okay, just keep in mind when we talk about putting money into the capital projects, and there's two components of the capital account. One is equipment, and the other one is the actual facilities acquisition and construction. If we increase facilities construction and acquisition based on the additional state aid, If in fact we find that once the collective bargaining agreement is settled that we do need the funds, you can't say, hey, I want to not do this project and reallocate those funds from that capital facilities account back into the general fund. That's not permitted.
You actually have to spend the money then at that point.
Well, no, you don't have to spend the money, but it has to stay in facilities. And if it, and you can let it sit as a balance toward the end of the year. You just can't transfer it into your current expense budget and use it for a different purpose. Just like, you know, the funds that are in our capital facilities project now, we can't transfer it into salaries or any other account that is within our current expenses. In the capital accounts that are equipment, you do have the ability to do that, and funds are transferred from our general fund current expenses to our general fund capital equipment accounts. But when we're talking these projects, we're talking construction projects. So, you know, that's, if we allocate funds for that or appropriate funds, that's where they would have to remain and be used or not used, and then we can put them into a capital reserve or let them roll into surplus. But it isn't, hey, if we need the money based on a settled contract, we'll take it. If you appropriate it for a different purpose, and then as it turns out, you do need it, and as long as it's within either equipment or the current expense part of the budget, then you would have that ability. But I'm just cautioning you that if you put in construction, you don't.
So if it's put into, let's say, the salary account, and the settlement comes in and doesn't utilize those funds, that can be transferred into the capital to fund capital equipment, or no?
Capital equipment, yes,
Okay.
but not into construction. And you can't transfer from construction into the
Either way,
salary
you can't.
accounts.
Either way,
Correct.
you can't do that.
And buses are equipment?
Buses, we do that at lease purchase, they're part of transportation, so they're fine.
It could be transferred to the
Yes.
buses, okay.
So can you give a couple of examples of what would be considered capital construction?
Anything that's in the long-range facility plan that we're not doing as a maintenance project, but which is pretty much everything on here. So roofing projects, renovations, bathroom renovations, any of those would be construction projects. Equipment is the core switch. Under maintenance, we have a maintenance vehicle in there, that's equipment. We have replacement of HVAC equipment that we purchase and do the installation ourselves. And the other server upgrades that we have under equipment. It would be the 12-30300.
Sorry.
We have it under athletics, goalposts, scoreboards, things of that nature are all considered equipment.
Okay. So I just, for a little perspective, you know, we're not far into the negotiations process right now, but we would very much, I think the board would very much like to have a settled contract by the end of June, and $156,000 is less than 0.5%. So just to, you know, give you an idea of how much or how little, like, wiggle room that does provide the board in terms of negotiations, it's significant but insignificant at the same time.
And I guess the one concern, if the revenue isn't considered a guaranteed renewable revenue source, if the collective bargaining agreement is settled regardless of that, that will be a increasing revenue. So if it is put toward salaries, it would be anticipated that that would be what its purpose is in future budgets. And if in the event that we have a state aid cut, then we're going to have to make other adjustments in order to fund those obligations that we have.
I'm much more comfortable putting that money much towards salaries, and if we don't need it, then we can reappropriate it later than to tie our hands and put it towards a project. I'm sorry, but I think we do need the wiggle room there.
So if you were to go to 2% and then use that 156,000, you're just under a 2.5% increase?
No, that's at 2%. The 156,000 is just an increase in state aid. It has no impact on the tax levy unless we specifically reduce the tax levy by 156,000. Because right now we have a balanced budget. So, but we budgeted X amount of dollars in state aid. Well, our notice, we have an additional $156,000 in state aid.
No, I understand that, but if you were just to look at the numbers and do a percentage basis, it's still just about a 2.5% increase in the budget. Because
in the
that's what,
budget. I'm sorry,
because
I thought
that's
you were
what,
saying tax levy.
because next year's 2% will be based on the 2.5%, or just about 2.5% that's this year. Right? I mean, even though it's state aid and it becomes part of the base budget, and the base budget itself is going up 2%, next year's budget, if you do 2%, it's really based on just about 2.5% from this year.
But next year's budget's, the cap isn't on the budget, the cap is on the tax levy. So the tax levy, the 2% on, let's stick with 1920, the 2% increase allowable on our tax levy is based on our current year tax levy. That's going to be what happens in the subsequent year, regardless of our state aid number, regardless of what percentage increase our budget is, whether our budget's 1% or 3%. The cap, or the allowable increase in our tax levy, is 2% of the tax levy.
So it's not increasing the pie.
So it's, see, and that's one of the difficult things when people say, well, you get a 2% increase, when your budget's going up 2.5%, 3%, well, your tax levy is only going up 2%. So you have a loss there with regard to your revenue sources. So you either need to, if your budget's going to increase, you're making other adjustments in your revenue sources in order to balance the budget. But the tax levy increase is based on the tax levy, not the budget. So what would happen if you utilize that additional state aid to reduce the general fund tax levy that we're using in the 1920 budget, then the 2% increase that we would apply in the subsequent year budget would be less than it would be if we are at 2% this year. Because once you don't utilize the 2%, you don't have that percentage. Say you go to 1%. Well, you don't have that 1% as a revenue source. You don't have that 1% revenue source for eternity. At least for the next 3 years. If you utilize it as a bank cap in the subsequent 3 years, you have the possibility of bringing it back. But if you don't and let it expire, then that would be 1% that you don't have as a revenue source for all the subsequent budgets.
Right, and then if you use bank cap, then potentially you're shooting a budget up, 3% in a year, which is dangerous too for people that aren't fixed incomes. And I mean, even 2% for a lot of people is a lot, because if you look the average assessed house, $479,000. Well, I mean, most of the houses that I see around town are $800,000-900,000. So that's a pretty decent size increase for someone per year, on top of last year, which was pretty much the same.
Now, the one thing the board does have the ability to do, and I wouldn't recommend it for this budget because I don't think it's necessary, but we are looking at projects on how we can get them funded or completed in the next few years, and we don't have any bank cap that is expiring in the current year or after this year. However, you do have the ability to utilize bank cap and either utilize it as a recurring revenue or as a one-year revenue source, so that you wouldn't be able to use for a recurring cost, but if you wanted to complete a capital project because you were unable to complete it a different way, you could say, hey, we're going to utilize the bank cap in this budget, and then not having as a recurring tax levy revenue in subsequent budgets. But that would take a little bit more research on how exactly to apply that. But that would be a different scenario. But in considering projects in subsequent years, that, hey, we're not able to get it done within our budget, we lost state aid, so we're reducing our, how we're funding our capital projects out of our annual revenue, we would be able to utilize bank cap for a one-time project for 1 year.
So do you need an answer for us about the state aid then?
Well, yes. And the reason being, working on the submission to the Department of Education. Again, we're looking to approve a tentative budget for next week, and I'll have to submit it the following day. So whatever, the adjustments that I've included on this memo, as well as any adjustments that we decide on at this workshop meeting, I will incorporate between now and next week's board meeting so that we have a tentative budget that we can approve.
So that means discussion from us, guys. We have to first figure out how we want to use the increase in state aid, if it's towards the increase for the 099 account for the salaries and negotiation purposes, or if it's for a capital project or something like that. And why don't we start there and then move on?
I mean, as I stated earlier, I'm much more comfortable with the scenario that's proposed to us here in the memo. It does give us a little more flexibility down the line. If we don't need it, that's great, then we can reappropriate it to equipment or something else. But if we don't put it here and we decide to put it in capital projects, we could be shortchanging ourselves.
I agree with you, Mike. I think that there's a certain amount of flexibility and responsibility that takes to putting it towards salaries, and I also think based on the F&F conversations we had, that that's probably the best place to put it for right now.
And the only additional option, I've identified the 30,000 to go toward the capital projects in facilities, because one, we have a lot of items on our capital, on our long-range facility plan, but there are also a lot of maintenance items that were originally on the plan that we're taking off, we're looking to do in-house to provide more flexibility if we did not want to appropriate that 30,000 toward capital projects and put it toward the maintenance projects, so that it does provide more flexibility for the Board of Education for the purposes of negotiations, because funds from maintenance, you can decide not to necessarily do a maintenance project within the year if you need the funds. But again, as I indicated, if you put in capital projects, you will not be able to utilize those funds. That would keep our capital projects at the current funding of $600,000 out of the current expense budget, and the balance of it being funded through capital reserve. But I just throw that out as an option with regard to flexibility in the funds, because we do have the open contract, and we do have capital reserve for the purposes of funding our capital projects.
But that's the 30,000 you're talking about, not the 156, correct?
Yes.
Okay, 156,000, all right.
So the last time there was an open contract and it was settled, wasn't there significant funds that were left over, that were budgeted, that wound up transferring over?
Yes, that was 2 years' worth of negotiations that were, we had the first year where we budgeted for anticipated salaries. The contract wasn't settled. We constructed a budget for the second year without settled guides or without a settled contract. And once retroactive pay was issued, there was adjustments made or surpluses in the salary accounts that we had rolled over and were accounted for in the subsequent year's budget. So yes, there was additional surplus. But again, when you get into negotiations, there's a lot of give and take with regard to negotiations. One may be a salary line, but depending on what occurs in that negotiation, and I'll give an example, health benefits was capped for that group at 18%. So perhaps it wasn't, but at the time of budgeting, you don't know what necessarily is going to be the outcome of negotiations. So you may be budgeting based on a certain percentage, but then the outcome of the negotiations is, well, the salary increase may not be as high because there was other items within the negotiation that offset that.
So historically, looking back, let's say over, I don't know, last 3, 4, 5 contract negotiations, has there ever been an occurrence where what your best guess estimate was for a settled contract where it came up short?
I wouldn't be able to accurately answer that at this time. I'd only be able to look back at the last contract.
Because I would be curious to see. I mean, I don't recall hearing anything, but so.
I think the last settlement was a bit of an anomaly because there was such a shift with regard to health benefits. And the, concessions that were made by the WTEA with regard to salary, were offset by the concessions that the board made with regard to health benefits.
Correct me if I'm wrong, that the current budget includes funds from a reserve account to offset the anticipated extra health
Yes,
benefits
we utilize
expense.
all $695,000 of the emergency reserve funds to offset our health benefit increase. Now, I'm actually glad you mentioned that, because as I go through the process of developing the budget with the Department of Education, they have certain constraints. And I may run into the constraint that we cannot utilize all those funds specifically for the health benefits as it's currently budgeted. So there may be adjustments in the appropriations for accounts in order to, with the goal of utilizing those available funds in the emergency reserve account. But that would just essentially be a wash, so, and not really necessary for a discussion or a decision to be made. With regard to the $110,000 that we saved by Mr. Lee's work, on the core switch, the reallocation of that, are we okay with putting it toward the purchase of the buses if we're approved for the EPA grant? If we're not approved for the grant, then I would not look to move forward on that. And we may actually receive official notice prior to the public hearing, so there is a possibility that we would be able to make that adjustment or confirm that prior to the public hearing.
I think we need to do that. We can't leave that money from the grant if we're awarded that money on the table.
Okay.
It's just a significant cost that we're going to have going forward.
I agree with Tennant that we should move forward with those buses.
I agree as well.
And so do I.
Anybody against utilizing those funds for the purchase of the buses? Okay. Just trying to check one off the list there.
Last year was the first year we received the grant, right? It's been 2 years? Okay.
Kudos for the fact that we are receiving this grant for the second time in like 4 years. I think that's really great, so.
And for that grant, you have to purchase 5 buses for it to
No.
apply?
You can,
So you
could purchase 4, you could purchase 3, but,
It's advantageous to.
Yeah.
well, we're losing, we have 2 retiring this year, we have 3 retiring next year, so you're purchasing the 3 buses that you would possibly purchase next year, this year, and you're saving $60,000 in doing so. Again, it's a lease purchase, and we would fund this over the 5-year period. And and the lease purchase amount would be reduced by if we went with all 5, the $100,000 that we would receive. So it benefits, hopefully the next 5 budgets. So the other thought is the 30,000 that would be attached to the 110. Are we going to, do you want it to go to the capital projects or into the maintenance account? Because as you saw, there were some projects that we included, but there are a number of projects that we would like to get done, and we'll attempt to get done with available funds, but they have not been included in the budget. And if somebody was asking me for an example. Wish Carol Duffy was here, because we have the porch at Special Services Building is one. We have walkways at a number of schools. The concrete steps at the Old Mill Elementary School. We are looking to get that accomplished out of the current year funds. But if we're unable to, that was listed as a budgeted item that was initially included that we had removed. But there's a sidewalk and other improvements, locker repairs at both the intermediate school and the high school, special services front porch renovation, and other custodial and maintenance work at the buildings,
Right.
central school front steps, et cetera.
Not to cut you off, I'm sorry, but I like the idea of moving that back into maintenance, making it more flexible. And then again, if we don't use it at the end of the year, we can transfer it towards capital purchases. I don't think the $30,000 is gonna make or break us either way, so.
I'm in agreement with Mike. I think those projects are significant and their safety concerns and their needs, and I think that's a smart move.
I agree. Does anybody have an issue with that?
I agree with it as well.
I don't really have an issue with it. I think that as I'm looking at this piece of paper, what scares me is like the second row of boxes and all the money, which for the schools and everything like that, for the 2.7 million and everything like that. And that's why I kind of get very concerned about, spending, other funds and everything like that. But no, I don't have a problem with that either.
I do have to say, they are big numbers, Chris, but this is why we do put money into those capital improvement funds over the years, so we can make withdrawals to do the improvements.
No, I understand that. It's just when you see it,
Yes,
it
absolutely.
jumps out at you, and then, when you're like tacking on other things on there, it generally, it just gives me pause, so.
Okay, then we have the increase of state aid of $156,806.
Look, I'm admittedly torn on that, and the reason is that it is not guaranteed revenue. As much as it pains me, I somewhat agree with you, Ralph. It is not guaranteed revenue next year, so the problem would be, of course, thinking it through, and logically I'm sure everybody understands this, that if we were to use that for the flexibility, which I also agree is probably something we need, and it doesn't come next year, then there's the crunch, there's the issue. And the question should be, or I guess perhaps the fulcrum issue is whether or not we believe we can get to where we need to get with the negotiations with the existing revenue we have absent the state funds, because we didn't know the state funds existed until the last 7 to 10 days. And we don't know if they're gonna exist next year. Maybe next year we get 373,000. Maybe next year we get $54. Maybe next year we get hammered a little bit. They're both, I think that we can all agree they're both important issues.
Yes.
And I think that we can all probably agree, looking at the long-term facility list, that even though we do have capital funds and we have budgeted for some significant projects, there are a lot of needs still left on there that are safety issues, that are health and well-being issues, that are security issues. I'm just openly going through my thought process on it. I think it's a difficult decision to make.
And again, the same with the 30,000, because some of these projects are a gray line between a capital improvements project or a maintenance project. So if there's concern with putting it to the capital construction accounts and restricting those funds, if they're allocated into the maintenance account, it provides the flexibility. And if they're not used, or if they're needed for negotiations, they can be used for that. And if they're used or reappropriated by the board during the school year, that's fine. And if at the end of the year the board decides that we want to put them back in the maintenance reserve for a subsequent budget or the capital reserve, you have the ability to do that. Although I don't think that would necessarily be the case, that they would be still available at the year end. I think they're going to be required as a basis of the negotiations, or based on the list of projects that we've identified in the long-range facility plan. And just because it's on the LRFP doesn't mean it has to be earmarked as a construction project in the, because we are still, and I clarify that, because we're still developing these projects on this list. And if they are, as we go through the process, identify that they are more of a maintenance project as opposed to a capital improvement project, we would have the ability to fund them through the maintenance account.
Although I do agree, gentlemen, since we're arguing about this $156,000, that you don't know if we're gonna get it next year. If, God forbid, we do put it in salaries and we do need it for salaries and we use it for salaries and it becomes part of the base budget, come next year, we still have $686,381 in bank cap that we can tap into to cover the cost of $157,000 that we would be losing. That we would need to anyway, even if we use it for tax levy now, and next year we come across and say we're $157,000 short in salaries and we're balanced, we're gonna have to tap into that anyway. It's not like we're not leaving ourselves totally strapped next year if that money was taken away from us. We still have $686,000 that we haven't levied in the past, that we still have the ability to levy. And that perhaps we should have levied so we continue to invest and do maintenance into our schools.
And I think also, and I realize the importance of those projects on the long-range facility plan and completing these capital projects. We are looking at alternative sources of revenue for that on a long-term basis. We're discussing that in F&F. We do have funds in our capital reserve account, and we have the ability to put funds in our capital reserve account to fund these projects. Where on the other side of the budget, we are going to, we do need flexibility on the current expense side, and that's a very good point with regard to if we do lose a source of revenue in a subsequent budget, we do have the ability of bank cap that we have not used. Keeping in mind that we hopefully moving forward will not be generating bank cap based on the health benefit waiver, because we're going to be utilizing emergency reserve funds to offset those increases. So we are leaving that on the table moving forward when we utilize emergency reserve for funding the health benefits.
I just want to say that it's great having, say you can use bank cap money, but that's going above a 2% increase that many people can't afford.
Ralph, I totally understand that, but you do realize that was a tax levy we left on the table in previous years.
Absolutely.
Money we should have raised because we need to raise it. I understand.
The should and need sometimes are two different things.
But we also can't rely on the state to constantly give us state aid to lower our levy. We have a responsibility to invest.
They don't give us
into our
anything
staff
as
and
it
our
is
schools.
now. But the issue is that there are people that can't afford it, and there's no rule that says you have to go to 2% or you have to go to 1% or you have to even do anything. You do it based on what your needs are, and so that in every year, you look at what we roll over in surplus at the end of the year. Does that mean we budgeted too much when we were making the budget, or did we just do a really good job managing our expenses and we had leftover money?
Perhaps it's a little both, so we can invest into our capital improvement fund, so we have money for the future.
I understand the money for the future, but you can't tax people out of town. And I've been saying that for my 6 years here.
I understand that, but until the state of New Jersey figures out a new way to do this, that is our main revenue source. That is the reality that we deal with.
I understand that, but you still can't, just because that's the way it is, say, I don't care what the people out there have to pay.
It has absolutely. I trust me. I do care. I'm a taxpayer too.
Yeah, I
my
mean,
taxes go up every year, just like everybody else's, along with electricity costs, natural gas costs,
Absolutely.
gasoline costs, diesel costs. All these costs go up every year.
Mm-hmm.
Raises for our staff. The cost of health insurance go up every year, which is why we have the ability to have the tax levy. And the governor, when he made that rule, gave us the ability to put away bank cap and use it. It shouldn't be a dirty word. It is a tool there to help us continue to fund our schools so we're not stuck in a jam. That's what it's there for. And reality says if we have to use it, then we have to use it.
Well, and
I don't think anybody here is saying we should take the $686,000 and shove it into this budget tonight. I didn't hear anybody say that. All I said is we're talking about the $156,000. If we do lose that next year, then we still have the ability to raise it through bank cap for money that we left on the table.
But
and who
I
knows
don't-
what will happen next year? Maybe something will happen and we can reduce our budget. We don't know what's going to happen next year. It's an unknown. And that's the
No, I understand it's an unknown,
the
but
great comedy of this whole thing is we're almost 18 months out from where this budget will start.
right. But the idea that we're going to start off at 2% plus another 156,000, that troubles me.
Okay, we're not though. It's not 2% plus another 156,000. The tax levy is 2%. That doesn't change unless the board decides to take this additional state aid and offset the increase to the tax levy. Then we won't be at 2%. We'll be at 1
Whatever. yeah.
1.8, 1.6, whatever it would be reduced by. That's where we will be. Otherwise, we're at 2%. It's not 2% plus. I think the ability to use bank cap in the subsequent budget, it just addresses the concern that, you know, the revenue that we're receiving or the additional revenue will not be recurring. But at the same time, I don't know that the settlement or the negotiations is necessarily going to be contingent on whether the board utilizes or appropriates these funds for salaries or if they don't. I mean, I think the collective bargaining agreement is going to settle where it settles, regardless of whether the board puts it in there. What putting it under salaries just provides the district, after the contract is settled, flexibility in actually funding the contract. And if it's not necessary for the settled contract, then the board can reallocate those funds for other purposes or not reallocate them and let them go to surplus at the end of the year.
But you did say, correct me if I'm wrong, that we could use that to, in a different line, and still be able to utilize it for salaries if, depending on how negotiations goes.
Well, if the settled contract and we come up with salary guides and we run the payroll in the 1920 school year and we don't have the funds available in the salary accounts, we're going to have to make adjustments in other accounts in order to fund those because that's going to be an obligation. So yes, but same time as we could take salary, you know, remaining funds and reallocate it, we can do that in the current year because if we have breakage that we experience in a current year or in any given year.
So your recommendation about putting it into the salary accounts was because it gives us the most flexibility in terms of being able to transfer out of those accounts, reallocate down the road? Or do we have as much flexibility if we put 156,000 into maintenance?
Well, if you put into maintenance, then we're going to identify projects for that. And then our budget is approved with those projects in mind. And I would only recommend that if the board does not want to approve a budget with the additional 156,000 going towards salaries for the settled contract. Putting it towards salaries, which is, you know, an unknown number at this time, provides the most flexibility. But it also provides somewhat more of a comfort level in our ability to fund the settled contract. And if, again, if it's not necessary, if it's not needed for the settled contract, it'll be easily identifiable, and the board can at that time then appropriate it into maintenance for those projects that we would have otherwise identified.
I'm in favor of using those funds in the salary account.
As am I.
As am I.
I think my concern is that if we allocate those funds towards a salary, right, and if somebody told me that's going to help us out significantly in terms of the collective bargaining process, then I would, we don't have that information at our disposal at this point in time. And I wish somebody could say that's going to help us out a lot, because that would help me out a lot, right? So the same point in time, we don't have anything earmarked for the 156,000. So I don't have anybody telling me, hey, Chris, we can do this, we can do that with this money, right? We're just saying, basically, if we don't need it, we can throw it back in. That's your list of things? Our list of things, okay. So it's a real, I guess it's a troubling spot for me, because at the same point in time that I would like to somehow split it, it is money that was given towards the school districts from the state, so I believe that we should use it towards school districts to some degree. But if we can use some, you know, type of a gesture of goodwill towards, you know, towards a community, then I think that that would be, you know, something that's important as a board, you know, in relations with the school. So is there anything that says that we have to use all of this money, or is there any way that a portion of that could be allocated towards, towards salaries or towards a project, and then another portion of it get offset back towards the tax levy?
It can be divided up any manner that the board would see fit. So yes, you can take a portion of it, reduce the general fund tax levy, and use a portion of it into maintenance, or take the balance of that and put it into salaries.
So we've been sitting here saying it's all or nothing the whole time, but if we have.
No, if you look at the memo on the bottom, it says, it gives a scenario in the event that you were not use it and it would be returned to the public, in which case the decrease would be.
Right, but that's. Tenant, so my point is that's taking all of the 156,000 and returning it, right?
Right, but even if you take all of it, it's $6.28 over the year, and I would submit that if you look at the long-range facility plan and you think about the number that is, in fact, the salary and healthcare needs for the staff and the teachers, that it would be negligence, in fact, I'd say gross negligence on our part, not to at least use it for one or the other. To me, the value given to the taxpayer, the value given to the students, the value that we could give to the community for using that, either towards the people who teach our children, potentially, and take care of our schools and take care, and our nurses, et cetera, and bus drivers, or to take care of the safety, security, and health and well-being needs that we have on our long-range facility plan. I think the value of that far exceeds $6.28 a year. Even if the tax rate goes up at the 2%, it's $83.20 per year per typical $479,900 home. And Ralph pointed out that, yes, there are more expensive homes in this community. That is correct. But at the standard home, that's $6.93 a month. I think the value, it's about selling the value. What are we doing with the money? How are we making our schools better? I believe there was a report out this past 7 to 10 days that commended the fact that the Wall School District, the graduation rate has gone up over 4% since 2015. That we're the 3rd or 4th highest graduation rate in Monmouth County. It's about producing value, but it's also about keeping our students safe. It's about paying our teachers. And I just think it's gross negligence to say that we're going to disregard what's on this sheet, and we're going to disregard the needs of our staff and teachers for $6.28 a year per typical house. And one of the great things about property taxes are, and I did, that was using a phrase actually just now, is that they are in fact, one could argue and studies show this, one of the most equitable taxes. In other words, you make a decision to buy which house you're going to buy. You make a decision which community you're going to buy into. You have an effect on what your taxes are going to be. And I submit that people choose to live in Wall in part, unquestionably, on the basis of the fact that it has a great school district. And why does it have a great school district? Because at times we have invested in it. And it has to be invested in. Otherwise, you're not going to get champagne on a beer budget, right? I mean, that's just an old cliche. That's true. So to your point, I think we absolutely have to use it. And that's my position. To the point of whether we're not using it on salaries or facilities, I guess the analogy I'd make is I'm a guy walking down the street and I found $20 on the street. Am I going to use that $20 and expect to find it every month or every year on something that's a recurring expense or cost? Or am I going to use that $20 and perhaps buy something at Home Depot to fix my house that needed to be fixed and has been neglected for quite some time? I'm leaning towards using it either for the maintenance fund, which provides flexibility. I think that's perhaps a very good middle-of-the-road compromise between the two sides, or putting it in the facilities. My problem is I can't find $20 on the street and expect that it's going to be there next year when I have to pay the teachers. Again, 7 days ago, none of us knew we were getting this money. And really, the driving factor in the negotiations with the teachers, as much as I would love to pay them more money, it has to be driven by what we can afford. And what we can afford is what existed 7 days ago, not what exists now with the $156,000. So I guess I've now openly rambled through it in my own mind. I'm not for putting it in the teacher salary negotiations. as much as I think that they deserve to be paid, and paid well as the staff, it's not a guaranteed recurring revenue. And as a result, I think it should go to the projects, whether they be maintenance or capital, that have been neglected. And to be fair, it's not all neglected. I mean, things break. I could go home tonight, my window probably might need replacing. But some of these have been neglected. We do have very old boilers. We do have other projects, so I'm in favor of using it for either maintenance or capital.
Would you say maintenance just because there's a little bit more flexibility there than capital?
It's wise, but I guess that question for Brian is, and I did listen, but my recall is not always perfect. If it were, I suspect I'd be somewhere else right now. But my question is, if we do put it in the maintenance, and we don't use it for the salary, and I think in fact, you did address this, I can't be 100% certain on the answer. And we put it into capital or somewhere else, can it be put into capital later and then it's not part of the recurring? In other words, if we don't use it for the salary, it then could go into capital, correct? Or it could just be spent on maintenance.
I believe it could be put in at the end of the year as surplus to our capital reserve account if we choose to do that.
Yes, or you can put it into maintenance reserve,
Right.
or let it roll to surplus.
So, in other words, if we put it in maintenance and don't use it, at the end of the year, if it's left over, we can move it to capital.
And
Or you can move it to maintenance. The other thing,
Yeah.
if, I wouldn't say that, thank you, maintenance reserve account, similar to the capital reserve. And even though we're putting into maintenance, I would not view the projects that we would be completing with these funds a recurring cost. It'd be nice to have that recurring expense to do additional work in the schools, but, we have a base maintenance budget that is included in this budget. This would be funds that would be used to do additional work, and they could be projects that we remove off the long-range facility plan and do them under maintenance. It doesn't mean that they would have to be a recurring cost on a year-to-year basis. So it's addressing the same issue as putting it into a capital construction account.
I would be in favor of putting it in maintenance, but not for the flexibility. I'd want to use it for the maintenance. Because the other reason is that, and I'm sure that the other side can put two and two together, they're the teachers of our students. If we do use this non-recurring, and we agree to use this non-recurring amount in the negotiations, well, if I'm on the other side, what's my first position? You've got that extra money to spend. And the point is not that I don't want to spend it on them, but it's just not really extra money to spend. It is found money, for lack of a better and more intelligent phrase. So whatever we do with it, I think it has to be maintenance or capital. And I guess in that regard, it would have to go into capital, right? To make sure,
So that it's not used,
for salaries.
that would prevent it from being able to, yes. But again, the board, if you put it in maintenance, the board would be the ones reappropriating it for a different purpose. If we identify, if we include it in maintenance for projects, then it should remain in
I'm in favor of putting it in maintenance and keeping it in maintenance. I think those are the immediate safety, security, well-being needs that need to be addressed.
I'm happy with it in salaries or maintenance, whichever one makes more sense, but I agree with you wholeheartedly, and I won't even attempt to say it the way that you did, but I think it's irresponsible not to use it to invest in the school. So I'm fine with salaries or maintenance.
I do agree. We should use it to invest it. Whether it's the physical plant, the staff, I think we should put it in maintenance. God forbid if we do need it, it's a God forbid. We don't know. We're not nowhere close to being done. We don't know what the bottom line is going to be when it shakes out. But, yeah, I agree. We should use it. We should use it for maintenance items that need to get done. And if it's not a reoccurring cost and we don't need that $157,000 next year, so be it, and that's fine.
I'm going to disagree with the irresponsible part for the simple reason that this past week, as part of my job with a nonprofit here in town, Well Helps Its People, I spoke to a woman who's losing her house, in an area of town where you would expect her house really wouldn't be that much because she's lived here for 30 years, and going to Tenant's Point where you move into the town and you know what you're getting and everything like that. Yes, if you're moving into town today, you know what you're getting. When you move in and you're in a place for a number of years and then you see costs escalate, that's not necessarily what you signed up for. So being on a fixed income of $800 a month is not enough for her to pay for her nut for living here in Wall with taxes, and as a result, she is losing her house. So yes, I agree, there are many things we need to do here, but to say it's irresponsible not to spend money, I disagree with that, because I think there's a fine balance that you have to weigh and make sure that you're doing it correctly, where you're not going overboard and you're pacing yourself correctly. So I just don't like that terminology.
Very fair point. Certainly lots of people go through struggles. I've gone through struggles in my life. Lots of people have gone through struggles, and people have it much worse than all of us, and it's unmanageable, and it's horrifying, and it's very, very sad. But to be clear, the $156,000 is not going to cost that individual or any similar situated individuals a dime. That's money that, to the point, we found on the street, the state gave it to us and may or may not give it to us next year.
And I agree with that. And then you could also make the other argument then, because that's kind of found money, why don't we just put it towards the tax levy and decrease the burden to the taxpayer then? So, I mean, you could use that as an argument where that would have a positive effect on people.
Because I would make the argument in response that a $6.28 savings for that individual over the course of the year, which I can't do the quick math in my head, but works out to certainly pennies, if that a day, maybe a penny, probably less than a penny, is far outweighed by the value of using it for 3,000 plus students, 700 and some odd teachers, numbers of custodians, bus drivers, students that come in through the front door, whether they're safe, whether they trip on a sidewalk crack. Look, life isn't touch football, it's tackle football. Mm-hmm. And it's horrible, and my heart goes out to people, and God forbid I could end up like that one day. Any of us could. The point being, though, our job here is to create value for the community, but also value, more importantly, for our parents, our teachers, our students. Look, you're a product of Wall, I'm a product of Wall. If every year we were giving money back and reducing the budget, I submit that Wall Township wouldn't have the school district that it does have today. You can't get anything in this world by spending zero money or not increasing your spending. And we went through this last year in terms of every year inflation alone, every year the cost increase of healthcare alone. And you made a lot of points about what is wrong with the state or what is wrong with the region or New York City or here or there. Ultimately, my job isn't to worry about the state or the state of the region or the state of the country right now. My job right now, as I sit here, and I think it's all of our jobs, is to look at what's in front of us and run this school the best we possibly can. That's the point. And to me, yes, giving $6.28 per annum, per year, back to the average household in light and in contrast to all of the projects, maintenance and capital that we have, and all of our needs, not wants, but needs, I submit. I think that's gross negligence.
See, but the way you're phrasing it is incorrect. To say you're only giving $6.28 back to people on a house that's assessed for $479,000. That sounds nice, but the reality of it is you're upping somebody's taxes $76.93. So you could say, if you're doing that, you could say, oh, you're saving them $100, but you're only going up $76. The fact of the matter is, you're going up $76.93 on a house that's assessed for $479,000. Double that house, that person's going up almost $140 a year.
You're one of the 9. There's 2 missing tonight. You have this. You have the long-range facility plan. You got the budget.
Absolutely.
Tell me how I get to where we need to be without raising it. Point it out. You've had the budget. Go line by line and tell me where we should cut where we're still gonna provide the education that we provide.
There's
Where
cer-
we're gonna be able, just,
Look,
there's no platitudes, just give me
Oh,
specifics.
I can give you specifics, something
Go
I
for it.
brought up from day one when I was on the board. There, 2 people by contract in this district are entitled to cellular service, the business administrator and the superintendent. We have I don't know, it's probably $15,000 in here for cell phones and wireless cards and different things. I don't understand why we're giving everybody cell phones. And I said that 6 years ago. I say it today. And having that actually got us into trouble a couple years ago because we had an administrator that went overseas and rang up a $20,000 cell phone bill that wound up getting forgiven, but we should have never been in that situation. So, I mean, that's just one thing.
Okay, you're at $15,000. We've got about 5 million more to go.
Okay, I'm not going to sit here all night and
But
and go
it's not
through.
all night. You've had time to review it, just like we all
Right.
have.
Let the public have the binder, why don't you let us see it?
You've had time to go through line by line. This is a representative democracy. We're all elected to do this. This is not a direct referendum on the school budget. You'll get your chance with a direct referendum on the school capital project budget.
But-
In terms of this budget, these 9 people, minus 2 tonight, these 7 people, are the ones that are elected, and it's their duty and legal responsibility to go through this line by line. Last year, we went through the same thing. You've got $15,000, both of which I believe are part of contracts, right? So in other words, are they contractually obligated?
2 people,
Right, and they're contractually
not for
provided?
15,000. Yes.
Well,
But
I
it's
can't
everybody else.
break the contract.
No, I'm not saying them.
Then for the other ones, then fine, let's have a discussion about it. That's the point of this. I don't have a problem with going line by line and having a discussion. That's why we're here.
And that's my point. That there's a lot of things in here that you can say that maybe they're not, like last year, for instance, we cut the fuel budget because fuel prices have come down. We weren't spending as much, and we were left with a surplus at the end of the year. And again, that goes to my point. Do we have a surplus because we're watching every dime and doing it correctly, or are we over budgeting and then we're just stuck with a surplus at the end of the year? So that 2 completely different things.
Okay, but
I'd
you've been a
rather-
board member for how many years?
6 years.
Wouldn't you have a good idea? I've been a board member for 12 months. Wouldn't you have a good idea of which it is? You've gone through line item by line item for 6 straight years.
Right. And I think a lot of it is sometimes we over budget.
Okay, well,
And
we're here to discuss the
Right.
line items. We were here the last time to discuss the line items. I think that that's healthy. I think that's something we should do. But it's something that I haven't heard. I've been through the budget. I had certain concerns. There were some small things, some middle-sized things. I had a concern with the assistant golf coach position. I read the rationale for it. I'm a golfer. I played golf in high school and college. And then I read the rationale, and I thought about it a little bit longer, and I thought to myself, all right, so if we have an assistant golf coach, we can expose more children to golf. I am one that believes that athletics is just as important, or not just, almost as important as academics in terms of the education of our children. I think that it teaches invaluable lessons that can't be replicated in any other arena, from sportsmanship to competition to teamwork to confidence, et cetera. And the fact that that assistant coach for $2,000, I think it's $2,100 and change, will be able to afford the opportunity for more than 11 students to play golf and expose them, and those are valuable lessons. I've learned valuable lessons from every sport that I played at Wall and in college, and the sports I still play today. It's not just about memorizing things and taking tests. But the point being is that I've been through it, and I'm comfortable with the line items. If you're not comfortable with the line items, don't say now that all of a sudden you've not been given the opportunity.
I didn't-
Identify them and let's
I didn't-
discuss them. We have.
I never said that.
But
that I wasn't
where are
given
the
the
line
opportunity.
items?
But to stay on track, I don't think the issue right now is whether we want to have a 2% tax levy increase unless somebody wants to raise that question, because we are increasing the budget by 2%, but that was the guidance provided by the Board of Education throughout this process. The discussion is, unless somebody wants to stay on that, the discussion is, how are we allocating the additional state aid that we received? Are we going to reduce the general fund tax levy, or are we going to appropriate it within the budget? And just before we go too far off track, just to correct Mr. Addonizio, I do not have a cell phone in my contract, so there's not 2 contracts that have a required cell phone.
You used to.
I used,
Yep, right, okay, so I
well,
stand,
we were
so,
talking about this budget, and you're
Okay.
going through rattling off
right.
numbers, and you made the statement that there's 2 contracts that currently have cell phones in it, and mine does not.
okay, I stand correct. There were 2 contracts up to, I guess, your current contract that had that in it, correct?
So I'm just gonna, if you give me a second here, Tenant. I'm gonna spend your $20 a little bit that you found on the street. And so what my point in terms of if there's some type of a split, okay, because if you're gonna ask taxpayers in this town to do something, you know, or you mentioned referendums and different things like that, okay? I would challenge you to go down and take some of that money, go to a penny store and buy a little bit of candy and give it out to all the kids that you see around the street. So that when you ask something of them, they might feel like they've gotten something back from the board. And I wholeheartedly agree with everything that you say about the school districts and the teachers and the kids and how much, it is our job to oversee that. And we certainly, every single person here wants to have this school district be the best it can possibly be. And we are very proud if our graduation rate goes up. And we're very proud of our basketball teams and our football teams and everybody that contributes, okay? My point to you, and when you say gross negligence, I don't really get, ruffled feathers because I kind of am a duck and it just goes off my back a little bit. But my point to you is that there is something to be said in terms of giving something back to the taxpayers as opposed to just saying, forget about it. And I do think that it deserves some type of a conversation as opposed to.
I think that the day that we have all this, or the large items fixed, and the safety, security, and health and well-being issues are fixed, and the day our teachers are well paid, and that we get an excess amount of money, then that's the day that we pass out candy. Until then, the benefit that I think this board has to provide to the community, to its students, to its constituency, is an excellent education with excellent facilities. So until, in my mind, we reach excellent facilities and excellent education, and it's fully funded, and we don't have these long list of needs, not just here, then, yeah, I'm all for it. I'll go to the dollar store and give them each diabetes.
I understand that, but then that day's never gonna come. I mean, there's
Well,
always
but
gonna be
there's the
something else that's on
reality.
there.
Well, there you go. But, then you tell me how to fix it.
No. I'm just telling you to consider the public perception and persona of everything, all right? So if there's things that are gonna happen in the future, we need to be cognizant of that now and not just be, spending every single dime that we get every single second of every single day.
But that was the point of this. We don't want to be surprised. And there are things coming up, by the way, that are going to be surprises, even though they shouldn't be. We've each had this every meeting. And one day, one of us is going to wake up, another boiler blows up that's 70 years old. One day, somebody's going to trip and fall on broken asphalt or a sidewalk and sue the district, and our insurance premiums are going to go up, or we're self-insured. It's going to cost us money. The fact of the matter is, and if that day doesn't come, guess what? Again, this is a struggle. This is difficult. And the cost of things don't go down unless there's deflation.
I understand it. So I'll end the sort of discussion here. Is what I'm just trying to say is that I think that in terms of the overall, I guess, aura of what's going on here is to say gross negligence and different things like that. It sort of disparages, some other folks who might have a little bit of a different perception, okay? And it's not that anybody here wants to, not improve the school and different things like that, all right? It's just that we're having a brainstorming, this is all a brainstorming effect and idea of, what the possibilities are. And if it's, a portion of that can get back to the state or back to the community, then that's great. If it's not, okay, and every single dollar has to be spent there, then that's fine. And then, everybody votes here. But I'm just saying that the idea of giving something back to the community is not necessarily a terrible one.
Can I
Chris,
just interject something?
No, Mrs. Wozniak's been waiting
Go
for a
ahead.
while.
I agree with you that we have to give something back to the community, 100%. But I disagree with what we're giving back. I think we're giving back tremendous value, tremendous value. When I first moved to town, I'm not a native. When I first moved here, the school district was of a mind of doing more with less, and very proud of that. And it was great for a number of years that the district was doing more with less and doing more with less until it came to a point where the district was doing less with less. And things were not being accomplished. And so my personal theory, because I was not involved on a board level certainly, so I had my own personal opinions, was that our students were doing well, not necessarily because of the school district and the things that were offered, because there were a lot of things that the school district was not able to offer. So they were excelling because of their parents and their family and the community, and kind of in spite of certain things that I felt the school district was lacking. And as of the last number of years, we're doing more with more. And it's not an obscenely amount of more. It's within this 2%, and I kind of feel that that's reasonable. If we really wanted to, jump to the forefront of school districts, we'd be spending a lot more than 2%. So I thought this budget was an excellent budget. I think the administration did a really good job. And I went through it with the same attitude that I went through it the first year that I was on the board. And I'm pretty comfortable with what's in it. And I think that we're doing a lot of things, we are accomplishing a lot of things, and we're on a path for making tremendous improvements. And I think that's a good investment.
Again, I don't disagree with any of that. And again, I don't really mind spending the $156,000 towards the school district. But I'm just saying that we shouldn't, dismiss an idea as, something being ludicrous to be, investing back into the taxpayers who foot all of the expenses to begin with.
Are you suggesting a scenario?
No, again, it was a philosophical conversation that I was trying to have in reference to, sort of.
We're just trying to get an understanding of.
Well, to get the wrap up, I'm in favor of putting it in the maintenance.
Mr. MacArthur?
I am in favor of putting it in the maintenance also, but to add to this, to the conversation, I don't think we're being irresponsible, and to coattail what Robin said, we've been doing more with more. If you look, the reason why we have bank cap is because we didn't go to the levy, because we were thoughtful about the budgets and where we needed to be and what our needs were in the past. We could have taken all that money then. We could take it now if we wanted to be, those evil vultures and rip the tax dollars. We're not. We're trying to accomplish and get a lot of accomplishments done for our districts to add values to our homes. I mean, the school district is one of the things that Township, it shines in Wall Township. It's one of the reasons why people move here. We don't have a Main Street. Nobody's walking down Main Street like they are in Manasquan or Belmar. We have our school districts. We don't have a beach. This is our shining example of what Wall Township is. And I think what we've been doing the last few years in trying to continue to better the district and improve the facilities, I think we got to keep going.
Is there a recommendation to use it towards tax relief? So
No.
one of the two options I provided.
So we have 3 board members who are okay with maintenance right now. So are there other board members who are okay with maintenance?
Or the other option of salaries?
Right. Maintenance or
Tax relief,
salaries?
Salaries, or
I'm okay with maintenance or salaries.
I'm okay with tax relief at this point.
I would, in my short time on this board, I would have to say one is maintenance, but I would also like to see it go back to the taxpayers, maybe do a split. You do like a 60-40 split to maintenance and taxpayers. Can we split that way?
absolutely.
Because
Here's a hypothetical question. If we use $156,000 and we use it towards maintenance, we're going to repair real needs, real things that have been neglected for want of funds, not for want of wanting to have it done, but for want of funds. And these things are going to be done, and that's going to create safer, better physical facilities, both for the employees as well as for the students, and for the community that comes into the schools for events, whether they be sporting or musical, etc. And my position is, and it's been very clear, but I really do believe the value created by that for the community far outweighs, if we were to split it, for instance, $3 back to every taxpayer over the course of the year, which is less than people in Wall, many people in Wall pay for a cup of coffee. I guess you could get, what? You can't even get a Big Mac for that. The point is, I think that value, this is not soaking the taxpayer. I'm not up here banging on the drum to use the bank cap. I'm not up here banging on the drum to use it to increase our what we're gonna need to spend next year to use it for salaries for the teachers, even though that's necessary. I just think that value is far outweighs what really amounts to a McDonald's cheeseburger over the course of a year, one McDonald's cheeseburger.
You're not giving back $3 or $6, you're taking $76. Because you can't.
No, two separate questions. We're talking about the $156,000. We're not talking about right now the 2%. The only decision right now is $156,000.
It's all money.
No, you're conflating the
I
two
gotta
issues.
ask a question. I should have asked this maybe several years ago. At the end of the year, what do you expect to see in the budget? Zero?
What do you mean? What do you?
Are you expecting to see zero? We have no surplus, we spend all the money that we raised and that's it?
No, again, if you have surplus, a good way to earn surplus is at the end of the year, and I brought this up maybe last year or the year before, come like January, February, March, you say, okay, we need paper. Do we need to buy 50 pallets of paper, or can we get by buying 25 pallets of paper? And then you generate a surplus that way because you're not spending all the money. It goes to, at the end of the school year.
I completely understand
The
that.
schools have a budget. That whole idea of use it or lose it, that drives me nuts.
I don't believe in use it or lose it.
But people do here. And they
if
have
they're
done that in
using
the
it
past.
as use it or lose it here, then they're doing it wrong too. But we've been over this, even back when you and I were on F&F. The use it or lose it is gone. That's not the attitude that should be coming from the staff. Am I correct in that?
Correct. And it's actually a
That is what
contradictory
we've been
statement that
striving for years.
You can't have use it or lose it being done if you're generating surpluses at the end of the year. It's one or the other. If you're generating surplus, it's because you're not using it all. If you're using it before you lose it, then you wouldn't have any surplus or any balances left at the end of the year in any of your accounts.
Well,
So
absolutely, but the question is, then are you using more than you actually need? Again, I believe good surpluses are created because you watch your spending and you modify things as the year goes along, and then you're left with a
Well,
surplus.
so let me ask you this, based on our budget, in your mind, what do you think would be a good surplus for us to roll over at the end of the year? But also keep in mind that, weren't we talking about that we should be averaging about $1 million a year in projects we should be funding annually? And I know we've shaved that number down over the years. There are things in this budget that we have shrunk over the years. I don't think the money that we roll over at the end of the year, whether it's due to over budgeting or good surplus, which I think it's more towards good surplus, is that obscene. I don't think we're milking the taxpayers. And again, I'm gonna put it towards, like Tenet said, if you think that there is, then please show us.
Well, and to address the year-end surplus, it's being used in two ways. It's being used to fund the subsequent year's budget, as it is in the 1920 budget. Just in anticipated balances, we have $1 million being rolled over as budgeted fund balance, whether we move that through reserve accounts or not. That's an anticipated balances at the end of the year. It either goes toward the subsequent year's budget, or we move it into emergency reserve, again, for use in the subsequent year's budget, or into capital reserve for addressing the projects that have been identified in the long-range facility plan. So even though the budget is generating surplus, and part of the reason why we generate a surplus is because we are currently budgeting for June of 2020, May of 2020. We don't know what the cost of fuel is going to be in, January through June of 2020. So there's certain things that are difficult when you're projecting out 18 months. So, and again, going back to we don't have the use it or lose it mentality, and that is why there's balances remaining at the year end in the supply accounts.
I'm going to agree with what Robin said. I went through this budget, I think, at least 3 times. And I think it's one of the most responsible budgets that I've seen in my 5 years on this dais. I wanted to find problems with it, and I couldn't. And considering the lack of emails that were received with regards to suggestions on places we could save and questions that were being asked, it seemed that was a general assumption of everybody. So if we're bringing up issues here and now, that's fine. But my point would be is that we've had 4 weeks to bring up those issues. I don't think Mr. McGee received many emails with regards to our conversation prior to the F&F meeting, and I think I've only been copied on one email that had any budget questions in it whatsoever. So the accusations of overspending in here seem poorly timed. But with that said, I think we need to make a decision, or at least, I don't know if you want a straw poll or whatever, if we're going to do tax relief or maintenance, or how you want to handle this.
Well, have we addressed, the recommendation initially was, I gave two options, one for salary increases with regard to the WTEA contract, or towards tax relief. Is there any interest in putting it towards salaries from any board members for discussion by anyone? I just want to be able to take something off my list. So then the matter is applying it towards tax relief or to the maintenance projects?
Maintenance.
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 Well, I wanted a hybrid, but I mean, we're not gonna have that, so that was my idea. I thought.
So in lieu of the hybrid,
So that's 50/50, so, now it has to be.
oh no,
a loader, that can't be another category?
that can be, that's
Can-
what I
can
asked you
that be
earlier.
my-
Did
yes.
you have a proposed scenario to put on the table for the board to consider?
I would take tenant's favorite project, and I would put that one on there, and then I would take the rest of it and then give it towards the tax relief. So he would be able to pick it.
You know what my favorites are? The ones that need to be fixed now.
I gotcha.
The ones that are dangerous
I
to
gotcha.
my kids and everybody else's kids. I just don't have to.
No, listen, I'm not trying to be humorous. I'm just, yeah, I understand that, but you're on F&F, so I would defer to the F&F chair for what the most demanding projects are.
You know, I have to say, we're sitting in a room where last year we got creative with the budget, and look at what we were able to do. Because we invested in our school. Look at how nice this room is compared to where it was a year ago. We actually have our meetings here now. Because we invested in our schools.
But we used money that was that we had saved.
Yes.
And
But the fact is, we spent it.
we had money that was
We
saved because of
invested into our
budget
schools.
surpluses.
Because if you
Well,
remember correct, we
Portion of it
didn't
came
want to
from
spend
capital
that.
reserve, the other portion came from our maintenance budget.
Right. We didn't want to spend that money, remember? That came towards the end of the budget. It was like, oh, we got the money, we can do this. We made the investment. Now look. Look
And-
at what it is.
How is the $156,000 different, Ralph? That the point is, it's not going to be a recurring cost. We're not obligating ourselves for next year, and it's something that, hey, we
Absolutely.
can tackle some of this.
Put it in maintenance, let's use it. We don't have to put it back in the subsequent budget. Or are we gonna give it in tax relief, lower our tax levy, and then create more bank cap for later on that we just tap into? Because we didn't generate enough revenue to begin with.
Well, I think every year we generate enough revenue, and it goes to how we spend the money and what we do with it.
Obviously, some of us are philosophically different of where we're at. I've been sitting on this board now 3.5 years, and I've been pushing since the day that I got here to do infrastructure work. Okay? One of my little pet projects got put back into the budget. The repaving of the play areas at West Belmar. When my kids started at West Belmar 9 years ago, I was told it was in the capital improvement fund. And it's not only at West Belmar, it's at all the schools. Why? Because we continue, us as a board. We've inherited the mistakes of the past, just like the future boards will inherit our mistakes sitting here today. We didn't have the money to invest in our schools.
No, I agree with that because the district did many stupid things.
Right.
Many,
and we're
many
trying to
stupid
right
things.
those wrongs, and it's gonna cost us money.
Yeah, but you have to do it. You have to do it correctly. I mean, again,
You don't think that this is responsible?
it's not. You can say I can say it's responsible. You can say we're responsible, and you could find 50 people that say it's not responsible. So the question is, and to Chris's point, is that
Yes.
if you're looking,
Yeah, it would be nice, it would be nice to give back the $3, but in reality.
again, you're not giving anything back.
Hold
You're
on a
still
second.
taking $76 from
I
people.
understand that.
But
All right,
but it's-
all right, so you're saying we don't raise the budget at all, we keep it completely flat,
And
And then we
first of
give money
well,
back?
no, that's,
That's irresponsible,
did I say that?
too. No, but that's what you're saying, because you keep saying, but you're raising it $76. I
right.
understand that.
But you keep saying you're giving $3 back or $6 back,
We're
but that's
arguing
not
over
true.
found money.
But no, that's absolutely true.
That
Because
is
if you're
not
to give it-
true.
No, well then what would be the return to the taxpayer if you were to give the $156,000 from the state back to the taxpayer? What does it say
They would
at the
ha- they
bottom?
would- they would
If
have
you
a
were to do-
less-
If you were to do half of it, it would be half of $6.98.
Yeah, but you're
Ralph
still,
just
you're
wants us
still
to say
taking-
differently. He doesn't want us to say that we're giving them back $3. He wants us to say that we're raising their taxes less because we're putting that money towards tax relief. So the tax increase would be less instead of saying we're giving them money back. It's just
Right.
the tax
I guess
increase
that's
would be
Well,
less.
I guess
Ex-
it's a
thank
great
you,
thing if
exactly.
want votes, but it's to me
Yeah.
not.
No, it's not. It's not about getting votes. It's about telling the truth.
But at the end of the year,
this is the
let's
truth,
just say, let's just say for argument's sake, and don't hold me to this, but we're gonna use this money to fix the old mill steps, okay? We decide we're not gonna use this, we're gonna do a hybrid, we'll leave the steps, we'll push it off another year, we're gonna take that gamble. And what happens when somebody gets hurt and we get sued? I know insurance is gonna pick it up, but was that responsible of us?
But again, that goes to the fact that we've spent time analyzing things and seeing
Or
what
do you
needs
think
to
we
get
should turn around and
replaced.
tell the state, take the $156,000 back and give it to a district more worthy than Wall Township?
Why would we do that?
But
That doesn't
Well-
even make
well-
sense, that comment.
But you're saying it's found money, it's saying it's money, you don't, what do you wanna do with the $156,000?
Well, you got two options. You can
Invest
spend it
in
on
our
maintenance,
schools, which in the
or
long
you can put
term-
it towards taxpayer relief.
So there was $100,000 a couple summers ago that was given to the state, right? All right, and I sat there, and I was not on the board at this point in time. And there was a vote to spend half of it and put it towards a district and give half of it back towards the taxpayers as sort of like a gesture of goodwill. So I think that is my point is, if you have one,
We didn't give any of that money back.
We didn't give it back,
There
we
was-
used it,
Any
it
of
was
that money back.
$99,000.
It was $99,000 and we spent every penny.
you spend every penny.
Yes,
Okay.
we did.
Yes.
Some,
Yeah, but I mean, none of it went to tax relief.
You know
I'll
what,
go
we
back.
had.
The proposal on the floor was a split, right? So who's for a split, right?
I am not.
No.
No.
I am.
No, you know what this reminds me of, though? This reminds me a little bit of the found money, if you will, that we realized by not building our bus depot on Bailey's Corner. We had all this money, and there was a consensus of the board to utilize that in really amazing ways to fund projects. It was unanimous, I believe.
We invested in our
And we
schools.
invested it in our schools. It was a lot of money, way more than $156,000. And so I am not trying to be arrogant or insensitive to our residents who have economic issues. That's why I don't take this decision lightly, and why you have to really think it through carefully and just do the best that you can and make the best decision that you can for everyone. And I think that this is so responsible, and that's why I am not in favor of splitting this nominal amount. It would be a nice symbolic gesture, but that's all. It would be almost an empty symbolic gesture. And so I stand with maintaining the budget and using that $156,000 in maintenance.
I don't think it was to begin with. I mean, 8 board members here. 7 board members. Again, this is for the purposes of developing the tentative budget, which will be up for approval next week. We have till the public hearing at April 30th, although I don't anticipate, hopefully, too many changes between now and then. But if things develop, we'll propose them or make adjustments as necessary. But it's consensus of the board. I'll move forward with appropriating the $156,000 into the maintenance line item accounts. And the other changes, as previously noted, with regard to the 110,000 from equipment. Okay, thank you.
Is there any further comments or questions from the board with regards to Brian's memo, the budget pages, or anything else relevant to this budget workshop? Okay, so then at this time, I will open the floor for public comment, which is limited to 5 minutes per person. And please remember to state your name and address when you come to the microphone. I found it, thank you, sorry.
Hi, my name is Betsy Cross. I live in Wall Township. I just wanted to go over a couple things with the budget. I've asked to have a copy of the budget binder that you're looking at, and I did not receive a response. So before you vote on it, I'm hoping that you could share it with the public and maybe post it online. Allison, you writing that down?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. If I could see the budget, I would definitely have some recommendations. So Mr. McGee, do you think you'd be open to sharing the budget?
This is not a question and answer, Mrs. Cross.
Okay, but Mr. McGee mentioned that, so if I could see the budget, I would gladly give you some suggestions. My calculation is the 2% cap, we're gonna be at $1.3 million. Tonight, you should have been talking about was how you're gonna spend the $1.3 million for the 2% cap, instead of going back and forth on God knows what. That was like a waste of an hour. You have $1.3 million is the 2% cap. How are you gonna spend that? 2% on the salaries, I think, is around $900,000. 5% increase in health benefits is almost $500,000. So you're over your $1.3 million. So now, if you could tell us, you know, how are you spending that? That's kind of what we need to see. That's your 2% cap. You can't really decide what you're going to do with the 156 until you know what you're doing with the $1.3 million, the 2% cap. I just didn't even understand the whole conversation here tonight. Could you answer a few questions for me? How much have you anticipated for Cheryl Dyer to make in the school year? In the 1920, that is, if she's still here. Could you give me that number from the budget binder? Last year in the budget binder was $176,666. Could you also give me the amount for Kim Keeter? Last year in the budget binder it was $51,400, and it looks like right now she's made $58,000 because of all of her overtime. Could you let me know what Kim Keeter and Dawn Choma are both doing here? Why are we paying them 4 hours to be here when you tape record the meetings? I'm not sure if Dawn Choma types up Brian's minutes, but I don't think it's necessary. So 2 cuts right there would be not hiring 2 secretaries to sit here at the meetings. You're probably going to save $10,000 right there. Could you answer for me, how much do you anticipate Mr. Smythe will be making in the 18-19 school year, if he's in the 19-20, if he's still here? Allison, who do you recommend I go to? Because I've noticed that Brian has made more in his W-2s for 2004, 5, 6, 7, 8, and I'm pretty sure also 9 and 10. What state authority should that go to? Because him as the business administrator, I'm not comfortable with what he's doing right now and how he got extra pay. So maybe Mr. Smythe, you could go over that tonight and let me know why you got that extra money in all those W-2s of yours. How much are you estimating for health benefits? If you could tell me that number on the page. I have last year's page. How much are you estimating for dental coverage? How much are you estimating for judgments against the school district? If you could read off all those numbers so I could leave with them here tonight. And how much are you estimated for the prescription drug plan? Are you suggesting any changes to the health plan for 1920? It's a disgrace that you still don't have teachers' contract signed from 3 years ago. So, you know, I kind of have to laugh how you're deciding about what to do with the money. Meanwhile, you gave more money to Cheryl and you gave more money to Kim Keeter. but you don't want to give it to the teachers. Are you getting standalone RX quotes? I've asked for that before. Lakewood is now outsourcing busing. They hired an independent contractor, a consultant. I'd like you to hire them here too. Their name is Ross Haber. So if you could look into hiring them. What they found out was that Lakewood was driving around half-empty buses. We're not even driving around half-empty buses. We're driving around buses with handfuls of people on them. So the money that we're wasting needs to be determined. Have you put in the budget a full-time music supervisor? If you have, let me know how much that is. How much are you estimating for Chromebooks? How much are you estimating for the Howell bus compound? And how much are you estimating for gas in Howell when the buses are there, probably a year from now? Mr. Smythe, I hope you're going to be in court on March 22nd. That's your court date. I will be there, and I hope we see some board members there. Allison, I know you went for Cheryl's appearance in court, so hopefully you can be there for Mr. Smythe's. He has
And with that,
personally
Mrs. Cross, your time is
sued.
up.
All right.
Thank
so
you very much.
Please go over all those questions so I can write them down, those facts and figures, and I'd like a copy of the budget binder. I'm going to tape it while you're answering my questions.
Mrs. Cross, we're doing public comment right now. It's not question and answer, so I believe Mr. Cooper would like to speak now.
Oh, okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Then I will tape when you answer my questions. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Andy Krupa. I am a parent of 2 students in the Wall school system. I'm at 2707 Garfield Street. And words do matter. They do. But I think everybody here is here for the purposes of improving the experience for the children. It's a lot of work that you do. I can speak to that because I am a retired school administrator. And my father was a president of the board for 15 years. So I come from a family of educators, and I understand the commitment and the time that you're putting forward. I do think, though, that with the point made about the 2% cap and whether you should be giving anything back or not it's almost a moot point. You do not have the flexibility in the services and the experience that you are providing to the children in this school district to decide that we should be giving money back to the public. I've heard in the short time that I've lived in Wall that mistakes have been made in the past. It's unfortunate. You are living with that. I am living with that. More importantly, our children are living with that. So when we hear about sidewalks, lighting, tracks, all of that not being up to snuff, you have a big row to hoe in fixing those things. I don't envy you. It's sad. It really is. But you're making progress. You have to stay the course. And it's sad that people lose their houses. It's terrible. But as has been said, these are things that are out of our control. They're things that are behind the scenes for those individuals you have no way of accounting for. And those are not your responsibilities. The children are your responsibility. The teachers are your responsibility. We need to keep that in the forefront of our minds. I'm a little emotional about this. I'm half Italian, I don't know. But this is very, very important. I moved from Livingston. I don't like to share that, but it's a source of comparison. Livingston's the 5th rated district in New Jersey. When I moved from there and was there as an administrator, we were not 5th. I dare say we were down 20, 30. It takes time, but you have to stay the course. You are not to give anything back. It would be irresponsible. The present-day children and the future children need an improved Wall school system. Thank you for your time. Oh, one more thing. I was on the street raking and a board member in the process of being elected, not a board member, somebody that was running for the board, she gave me a flyer, and she was going to take off on her bike. I said, no, come here. I said, I'd like to hear what you're about. And she told me, and then I said, well, what about referendums? It was like I said something horrendous. If you're struggling, I beg and really ask for your courage, and I don't mean to say any of you are not courageous, you are, but you need to consider that. And whether it's going to pass or not, in your mind, is not the right way to think. There are many, many families in this town. We have to consider what's best for the future students and today's students, as I said. So I do ask that you consider that. I hear so many things that are, well, how are we going to fix this? And we're trying to, shovel in the desert with things that have been neglected. Well, that's one possibility. So I throw that out to you, and now I will say good evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening. Ian Hughes, 1466 Garrett Drive. I just wanted to make a comment about the front page article of the CoStar on February 28th as it relates to the budget. I'm a parent of 3 young children, 2 of which attend Old Mill School. Sorry, can you hear me better? I'm a parent of 3 young children, 2 of which attend Old Mill School. Although each school within Wall Township has their own parent-teacher organization, I'm really just familiar with Old Mill Home and School PTO. During the 2018-2019 school year, volunteers of the Old Mill Home and School are hosting nearly 25 events to raise money for its students and staff of Old Mill School. These events are expected to net more than $45,000. All of this money is donated to Old Mill School for programs, events, and capital improvements. This includes 2 class trips for every student, K through 5 per school year. These could include, or they do include, the Franklin Institute in Philadelphia, Adventure Aquarium in Camden, the USS Intrepid Museum in New York City. In terms of capital improvement projects, I would remind you that Old Mill Home and School paid for the playground, approximately $30,000. They paid for the marquee, approximately $10,000. They also paid for the conversion of all chalkboards to whiteboards in every classroom. They paid for the rock wall in the gymnasium, landscaping and foliage behind the school, as well as the seal coating for the blacktop asphalt. When I was a student many, many years ago in a different school district, these types of programs, events, and capital improvement projects were paid for or budgeted within the Board of Education. Of the nearly 25 events that Old Mill Home and School will be hosting, most are not held within the school. However, there are several events held within the school in which the cost of security and custodial fees the costs of security and custodial support are much less than what is raised and donated. I estimate that for a 5-hour event from prep to lights out, it may cost the school around $500 per event, or roughly $2,500 per year. So for a simple fiscal review, the Board of Education costs equate to about $2,500, and the benefit to the children's school and the community is about $45,000. That is a cost-benefit ratio of 1 to 18. I think the Board of Education would be hard-pressed to get that kind of return on investment and in any other aspect of their entire budget. Rather than charging Old Mill Home and School PTO to host an event at the facility, I think they should be looking for ways to encourage more events because the benefit to the community is 18-fold worth the cost. Again, when I was a student many years ago, these types of programs, events, and capital costs were part of the budget for the Board of Education. I think it's reasonable for the Board of Ed to consider to pay for some portion of custodial and security fees when a PTO has an event within school facilities. In my mind, the board's decision to penalize a PTO or Old Mill Home and School to host an event, I think it's an egregious mistake that one disengages the volunteers, and it's a disservice to the children. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Madam President, I just,
Mr. McGee.
for the benefit of the order, it's something I wanted to bring up during the budget discussion, but we got sidetracked on what I think was very, I think, helpful and fruitful debate. I think that debate is good. We've had that conversation before. I think that's healthy. But I don't know the gentleman's name, but I just want to be on the record that I fully support the fact that the school board should, perhaps in the budget discussion, revisit the issue of looking at funding some of the PTOs and PTGs. I think that, I'm not going to belabor the point, but I just think that the value that is there. Thank you.
Any other comments from the board? Okay. At this point, I need a motion to adjourn.
I'll make that motion.
I second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.